Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Today I have a special local guest, which is not typical for us. His name is Eric Burtzlaff, and Eric is the principal and lead engineer at Raptor Civil Engineering, LLC. Eric founded Raptor in 2020 with a vision for a different type of civil engineering firm built on the pillars of communication and experience. And I want to get into the communication part because that, I think, separates you guys from the rest of the crowd. But Eric has worked in the greater Denver area for 10 years and has overseen 200-plus projects along the Front Range. Eric always has a passion for customer service and takes deep pride in his work. Well, Eric, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was a great intro. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's like somebody else wrote it, right?
Yeah, it's almost like it's kind of how we view ourselves. Yeah.
Before we get into it, I always like to ask everybody who comes on, tell me a little bit more about your entrepreneurial background. And what I mean by that is, did you grow up in a family of everybody has their own business? Did nobody have their own business? Where does your drive come from for starting your own business?
Yeah, it's been a long time dream of mine. I think on every interview that I did coming out of school, I said ultimately my end goal was to be a principal of a civil engineering firm. So that was always a goal of mine. And I think growing up, my dad was an upper management, so I got to see kind of that side of things, but not necessarily an entrepreneur. As we got older, he did decide to open his own firm. So that was kind of opening, and definitely.
And was he a civil engineer too then?
No, he was not. He actually owned an IT business.
Okay.
Recently sold that. And I'll say after my first job, actually, it's a really interesting story about how I kind of got
unpack it for
the real
us.
shove to go into this side of things. So I went and worked. 2008 recession hit coming out of school. Got laid off after 3 rounds of layoffs. Got laid off after my first job after about a year and a half or so.
Dude, same thing. When did you graduate?
Graduated in 2007.
Seven?
Yeah.
Okay, I was 08, and I felt like I landed the last internship in Colorado, and that same thing, laid off. Yeah. So what happened next?
Yeah. So what was happening during my time at this civil engineering firm is this was during the throes of the online poker boom. And I played professionally online poker and pivoted that for the next 3 years of my life until the U.S. government in 2011 kind of what we call Black Friday, but basically took down 2 of the biggest sites and froze all the funds.
That's what you were doing for 3 years?
3.5 years, yeah. And made a fortune, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so, and actually in that, not only was I playing poker, I also built a coaching business on the side of that. So working for myself kind of.
What kind of coaching?
Poker coaching. So it was,
okay.
So yeah, I was charging $120 an hour to candidates from 6 continents.
Why the hell are you
world.
back in civil engineering?
Well,
maybe you'll get there.
That world changed.
Because of this Black Friday thing.
Changed very abruptly in 2011. If you do research on it, it kind of brought the whole U.S. poker world crashing to its knees. And I don't think I ever viewed online poker as a permanent solution, but it was very lucrative for a 26-year-old at the time to be doing that. So basically, from that world, I had a lot of, I guess I'll say, or built up a lot of like privilege to kind of take whatever path I wanted to become that, to ultimately own my own firm, which was my goal.
I see what you mean. Because of the finances.
It was,
you were set up for being a little bit pickier.
Mm-hmm. And was able to not be as pushy, to be patient, to really not jump jobs, learn things. And it really benefited me in the way, kind of stepping into that. And then also just from an accountability standpoint of just, when it's a very strange way to be an entrepreneur, I'd say, like not what people would typically think, but there was aspects to that where there's the ups and downs of business ownership. There's keeping a level head, making the right decision, continuing to trust yourself as you continue through it. That those were all things that I took from that portion of my life into this next portion of my life. So, and then basically from that point decided to open Raptor Civil Engineering during the heart of the pandemic, decided to step away from my job.
It's just, that's just about as good as a time as there is possible, like we did with in the heart of the Great Recession. Exactly. It's like, oh man, that's a perfect time.
Well, and it was actually like, and I'll say like I had my eye out for that kind of other time as well. And there was no real like it felt like it felt like a little mini recession. It felt like everybody kind of shelved their project from April till June, July, August, and then everybody took those projects and move forward with them in August, September, and through the rest of 2020. And I think that really allowed us to kind of hit the ground running with Raptor, which it's been a lot of fun thus far.
So one more question, if we peel back again,
Yeah, sure.
kind of go back in time again. You were going to interviews telling people, I want to be a principal. Mm-hmm. Two questions. So one is, what was the reaction to that? And then where did the drive come to be to want to own your own business or at least be a principal / partner in the business? I mean, for me, it was always, I grew up poor. My mom hates when I say that, but it's the truth. Like in my world, it was poor.
Yeah.
And I never, it's like one of the favorite things that Kanye West has ever said, love him or hate him, is having money isn't everything, but not having it is. Mm-hmm. Right. And so like, because once you have enough and you're not worried about it anymore, I mean, that's just like your mind goes all different kinds of places and opportunities. So where did that drive?
I'd say quite frankly that it was, I feel like I was able to diagnose so many problems in this industry. And even, I'll say my very first job.
Process or just in general?
I'd say in general. There's flaws to this whole world that we live in.
Yeah.
And I don't have the answers for all of them yet, but there's certainly, it is not a fluid from start to finish. And that's driven by a number of different jurisdictions that we work in, a number of different projects types, a number of different individuals and developers or public entities that work for us. But the streamlined version of this process, I feel like is still in beta testing, I guess. It's like there is not I don't think anybody's got it figured out. And if somebody does, that's got to be the best.
We were just talking about that upstairs. We were thinking, okay, what in a perfect world, what would have to happen for a firm like Raptor, F9, maybe RJA, all of the different engineers that we work with to pull together a project of this kind of scope, right? Mm-hmm. Where all of those things are needed for us to get everything done in 2 months, submit to the city reviews it, we have a permit in 4 months. And the conclusion was, well, Jesus would have to come down and part the seas again.
4 months on any commercial project would be, and that's what I tell clients. I mean, you've had the clients, I assume, who have told you, well,
that's where it came from.
We want to be done in 6 months. And I will say, we have been able to streamline some of these processes. Yeah. And it's very jurisdictionally based, but I'll say in Denver, Colorado specifically, we have been able to get in and out of the SDP process. I founded the company 9 months ago. We're already out of the SDP process on 2 projects.
That's amazing.
Which is a feat in itself if you know the Denver process, going through the entirety of that process to get approval within 9 months. Most people say 12. I do think it's doable, but I think ultimately, and you've seen it as well, developers, consultants, people get busy, and even the developer themselves sometimes lose balls.
100%.
And they track. And then you can always, I always tell developers at the beginning of the project, I don't know. I was like, there's one certainty in your project, and it's that something uncertain is going to happen in your project through this process. We don't know what it is yet. We forecast it for everything, but really trying to use that expertise when we talk about communication and expertise, the expertise being we are prepared for everything in this project. And if there is a surprise, we're even prepared for that. Just it might create a scheduling hiccup. But yeah, certainly, I'll say some jurisdictions, we're doing a project in Town of Empire right now that's a jurisdiction where they're like very much live and let live. They're like, well, there's 13 questions.
It's in the mountains.
Yeah, in the mountains. You have to answer 13 questions. And they're like, is your building over 2 stories? Is your building this? Is that? And if you answer yes to all of them, the board approves it. And so there's not a rigorous review process in that. And so that's kind of the bureaucracy of the review process is, as you know, painful a lot of times. And experienced developers understand that and realize that you have to bake in that. But like also you have to bake in these entities that we're working with are living, breathing entities as well. They have staffing issues. They have morale issues during the pandemic. And you see that where I'll use City of Denver again as an example. You see suddenly their 4-week review times turned into 8 weeks through the pandemic. And that was through that. And that's something that at the beginning of a project, if we said, you know, you and I are going into the project, we're going to finish it in 4 months based off current conditions. Well, those can change, which is, I guess, why we are, you know, still so secure in our job is that we have a constant finger on the pulse of these entities that we work with.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to compliment you guys on air was basically, and which led to, you know, from the introduction here was your guys' communication. You guys are a breath of fresh air when it comes to civil engineering firms with your level of communication, meaning like I can either text Eric or email one of his staff members, and if it's not the same day, it's for sure within 24 hours. Vastly different from all the other civil engineering firms that we've worked with in the past. And basically you guys are our go-to people now because of that. Where did that come from? Was it seeing piss poor versions of that from other firms? Or
Oh, sure. I mean, I'll say the biggest complaint that I hear, and before jumping into Raptor, I would go out to beers with clients and ask, like, what are you seeing? What frustrates you? And the two biggest things I got answers for is everybody's too busy and doesn't respond to me, and we get a ton of ad services we weren't banking on at the beginning. And those are the two things that as Raptor we kind of opened up and we said, okay, let's target those two pretty straightforward things from the get-go. And so the communication side of things, I had a client that called me the other day, and he couldn't get in touch with. He has 3 projects, 2 of them in Texas actually, and one in Inglewood. But the 2 in Texas, I'm not working on. And he called me and he said, Eric, I'm so happy you answered the phone. He's like, I just need to ask a question to somebody, and there is such value in answering your phone. And in that conversation, he asked me if I wanted to get licensed in Texas and do these projects for him, and I was like, maybe we'll do that. But it was that type of conversation that I've had a number of different times where if you answer the phone and trying to instill that in a company has been challenging, I'll say. And I think as we grow, it will continue to be even more challenging. I think it's easy when there's 3 of us right now and we're all sitting at the same desk, and I say, we respond to emails within an hour. We respond to phone calls within an hour. If you can't do that, then 24 hours. I think other companies have this standard of 24 hours is the industry standard. Well, 24 hours in this world is quite frankly not good enough. And then alternate levels of communication as well, calling, texting. And I say, if you're on a phone call, and I'll say this to my staff when training, if you're on a phone call and a client calls you, whip out your phone, text them and say, hey, on a call, call you back.
Yep, call you right back.
And that is, even silly things like that go so far as communication go, and make a client feel comfortable with you. And that's another pillar where, like, people forget this business because we're architects, we're engineers. This is a customer service business.
100%.
This is a business where if the customer's unhappy, our lives become very difficult. The most difficult part of our jobs, if we just did architecture and engineering all day, man, that would be pretty easy. But the customer service aspect and navigating the review processes and the entitlements, those are the really challenging parts.
Yep, and I would say you're right. Number 1, customer service. Number 2, navigating all the bureaucracy, doing our job is, as far as difficulty goes, like, well, that's our bread and butter. Like, that should be expected. That should be the easiest part.
When I say as a civil engineer, even more so than an architect, because at least an architect, you're like, well, I really don't, I mean, he was difficult, but I love the way he designs, right? Nobody in the history of hiring a civil engineer has ever said, well, he was great, but the detention pond is a little bit misshapen and about 6 inches too deep for my liking, right? Like,
Eric starts drooling when we're in meetings and like we get to the cool looking architecture stuff. He's like, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I do care about it, but it doesn't move. I mean, what I'll say is, like, I have been on projects that are absolutely hideous, and I have been on projects that are absolutely beautiful. And from the civil side, they felt the same during the project. But once they're up and they have fish scales, you're like, what happened here? What is this?
Yeah.
So it's that was kind of, at least, and that was, like I said, that's one of the pillars that trying to keep, as we grow, the soul of the company in place. That's really something that I grapple with. That's one of those things that keeps me up at night. You asked me beforehand, like, what those are. The things that keep me up at night is, like, as we grow to a 10-person firm, as we grow to a 20-person firm, how do we keep the soul of the company and that feeling for all of our clients that they can call somebody, they pick up the phone, they're knowledgeable. I mean, even the number of times in the last 2 weeks I've been asked to hop on a call in the next hour and was able to do that for them, it's invaluable. You land the project right there before you even wrote a proposal.
Yeah, I'd agree with you 100%. Yeah. Maybe so talk about your growth. So it was just you that started all by yourself, and then how many people did you hire? How many people have you hired? What is your long-term, maybe 3, 5, 10-year goal?
Yeah, so I mean, I 3, 5, 10-year goal, I don't know. I don't want to force something. And I think too many business owners do. And that could be a naive thing to say. I'm new to this within a year of being a business owner. But my goal is to kind of let this organically, let the personnel that we hire and bring in kind of guide the path that we take, where I know that we want to scale, but I don't know if we're going to get to 10 and say, this feels great, right? Or if we're going to get to 20 and say, this feels great. Or we're going to have a great option to acquire a planning business, or a great option to acquire a land surveying business. And, oh man, then suddenly we're bigger. It's kind of, I try not to get too far ahead of my skis in that front of trying to, at least take what's given to me now and move forward with a vision of continuing to step forward. So, right. And I think what I'll say is, I did start off as just me. I think when I started off as just me, I greatly underestimated the demand for what we were offering. because
I think you did too.
The phone rang and it rang and it rang. And I was blown away that first month, once I stepped away, that people were looking for something different.
Yes.
And so that was such that really, I say, like, I was talking to my father about this. I was like, the baked in floor of where I didn't realize was there. Where, like, I think 3 to 4 employees was where I needed to be from the get-go. Obviously, scaling with it is a lot less expensive.
Right. I mean, honestly, I think, to be fair to you, like, you're swimming in it all day long, but I could have told you that.
Yeah.
You know, from an outside perspective of, like, I'm telling you, there is a huge opportunity for somebody who's young, energetic, and I emphasize energetic on a phone call or a Zoom call, and not just going to bore us to death with civil engineering or engineering talk, and responds like you guys do and then also reassures with expertise and just has all their ducks in a row.
Yeah.
Huge.
And I think I think that at this point I could easily, I'd say short-term vision into next year, I could see us being 10 people.
Wow.
It wouldn't be crazy to me. We just put actually right before I hopped in the car, sent out an offer for our fourth member of our team. And that feels like that'll be a nice stopgap for the time being. So, but we'll see. I mean, like I said, the work keeps kind of rolling in, and word spreads quickly around town. As far as we're getting calls from people, both from our website and from client recommendations, which has been
you guys are off to a killer start.
Yeah,
I mean, your start is something to envy, because our start was much slower than yours. I mean, for us to multiply past me and Alex, it took 3 or 4 years to get to that part. And now we're up to 12 architects, or 13 architects, give or take, and then 3 construction folks or whatever. But how has the hiring process been for you? I mean, what are you seeing out there? Are you seeing giant ratios of like 100 people looking for one job? How's that kind of panning out?
Yeah, I mean, it's been difficult, I'll say. Hiring has been a challenge each time, and we've hired about every 2 months for the last 6 months. And I'll say each one of those hiring experiences was different. We've tried a lot of things to find people. And I'd say the biggest gap that I've found in the hiring process is when you're using one of the mainstream sites, the LinkedIn, the Indeeds, the ZipRecruiters, they lump civil engineers all into one bucket. And so you get a lot of structural engineers referred to you, get a lot of environmental engineers referred to you, you get a lot of geotechnical engineers referred to you, get a lot of bridge engineers referred to you. But the land development subsection of that is very difficult to fill and very difficult to kind of pigeonhole your search into. And so I'd say that's been probably the biggest challenge that we've found, is actually finding candidates that have experience in what we do, not even just in Denver, but just anywhere. Is like working for one of these land development firms. It's a market right now that it's very boom for an employee, is what I've seen. Is like there are, if you go search Indeed right now, you will see every one of our competitors with the same job listed right next to each other. And that's something that as I've kind of stared at that, I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So we're trying to get a little bit creative. And I'll give you an example. Is I had a buddy of mine who does TikTok like editing. And so I actually reached out to him and I said, hey, can we shoot a hiring video? Like just to put on social media? Yeah. And he was like, yeah, why not? And so anyways, that hopefully is coming out in the next, like, I don't know, week or so.
Cool.
But something that's at least like, and he said to me in this like video shoot, he goes, I've never heard of anybody even try to do this before.
What can it hurt?
And that's where I'm just like, as I'm racking my brain, I'm like, what do engineers want? Because I think we offer a very appealing package for young engineers or even seasoned engineers who want to join a startup. It's not every day you get the opportunity to work for a company on the growth curve we're on, and you can be number 3 or number 4. That's worth and I'll say, like, my previous firm that I worked for, I had the opportunity to join that growth curve, and I at least had the opportunity to be patient from playing poker professionally for so many years that I was able to kind of ride the curve and take that experience and take what was given to me. And I'm immensely grateful for that. And it's being able to find candidates who buy into that, because people want to, like, we're not offering less money. But for example, I had a candidate who walked over a 401k. I'm like, well, we're just not there yet. We're 9 months old. It's like, we'll get to the 401k here in about, I don't know, this year. We're committed to it. But that's a perfect example of like a benefit that, you know, that candidates can't get past. Well, I want a 4% company match, not the upside here is so much higher than this 4% company match will
Right.
ever be, and it's going to be in place in the near future. So it's one that trying to find the total package civil engineer, which is another thing we try to do, is focus much more on personality fit and expertise and making sure that there can be client facing.
How are you testing personalities? I mean, is it through the interview process? Or are you
Yeah.
having maybe those first employees interview with you or tests?
Yeah, no. So it is through the interview process, and I've had the privilege of doing most of the hiring with my previous firm. So I've had a lot of
Nice.
experience in that. So I know how to kind of navigate the conversation. And I actually was listening to one of your pods where you talked about softening, or maybe it was Alex talking about softening the blow at the beginning of the interview to get nerves down.
Yes.
And that's kind of exactly what I go in for. And then you can see, and I'll give an example because I sat through 6 interviews yesterday. So I'll just be like,
Holy cats. It's so much work, isn't it?
6 hours of, and I showed that to my first hire, and she sat in on all the interviews. I was like, look at how much work this is. Like, this is like, just so you understand what's going on behind the scenes, like the value of a civil engineering candidate, or really a candidate in general,
Yes.
is very high. And I think a lot of candidates don't really understand that they do have, like, having a seat at the table has a ton of value as well. So I don't know if I'm giving advice to people who are interviewing, it's like, well, just realize that there was a lot of resources and a lot of sweat to get you even at the table.
Yes.
And so, like, use that to your lever. Maybe I'll shoot myself in the foot here by doing that, but I'll get hard lined at the next negotiations. But
Yeah.
that is
But honestly, to be fair, like the opposite could be said too. Is like it took a lot on our side to get you here, the combing process, all of that.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, it's all. Yeah. There's a lot of aspects. So I mean, we saw a wide range of candidates, and I called it. We had 6 interviews. I said there'll be 1 no show, and there'll be 1 guy who's late, and then we'll love one of them, and we'll be lukewarm on all the rest. And that's exactly how it is. The very first interview, the person no call no showed, and I was like, yep, we're off to the interview process.
Yeah.
So then the next interview, I can't get in touch with the guy, and he's in Texas, or in Tennessee. So he's in a different time zone. Made sure to coordinate that time zone with exactly. I'm like, what time?
Yep.
Your time zone do you want? Set up the interview. Well, no call, no show for 30 minutes. Suddenly my phone rings, and we gave up. We emptied out the conference room, come back. And so he finally calls, says, oh my gosh, I had the wrong time. I'm so sorry. Like
Even though you tried.
Yeah. So then he most certainly rushed home, put on a suit, and then did the interview. But we only had 20 minutes because our next interview was coming up right after. So he had a really abbreviated interview process. So I'll say, like, the interview process is difficult, and finding somebody who really fits your needs, especially in like a small upstart firm where you're going to be sitting with this person and talking to that person daily. If we were a 50, 100 person firm, sure, they can talk to whoever, right?
Yeah.
But in this particular instance, that's not really an opportunity that we have.
Is there a curveball? Well, I don't know. Again, I mean, you listen to the podcast, so you know that we kind of tell all sort of thing. But like, do you have an example of a question that helps pull that personality out for people? Not just besides your favorite color or something like that.
I like to be very interactive with them, and I find that that's the way. So when they're answering questions, I like to kind of like steer them or kind of like have a conversation versus a question and answer. Mm-hmm. And I found that if they're able to kind of have that conversation back and forth, first it eases concerns. It eases their nerves a bit too, that they're just talking to somebody, not sitting there. Because I mean, I don't know, you get asked a question and you're like, and you get halfway through it and you're like, what was the question again? And you like totally get swamped, right? So that's been my crutch, I think, during this, to highlight. And I have hired over the years some of the other civil engineering firms, and my previous civil engineering firm are so lucky to have these candidates. These candidates are. Some of these candidates that we have had the privilege to work with and interview and hire are just lights out, and are some of like the up and coming civil engineers, I'd say, in town. But a lot of that was the way I parsed through that was through that kind of more conversational approach to things. So I don't know that it's quite as quantifiable as like. I think
that's good.
Asking if they're on a desert island, how they feel.
No, that was a great answer, 100%. Yeah. One of the things you talked about, sort of, but I'd like for the audience to hear a little bit more about is, so. Just so you know, nobody knows what an architect does. Mm-hmm. Even my social media managers, and if they're listening right now, maybe they'll get mad at me for that. But we're putting together this newsletter, and they know what we do. But here's what I'm getting at is like they still some of the language that still gets used for what we do is convoluted, and it's not precise. And I like precision. And one of it is like, oh, this is our latest commission build. Like, nope, design. Right. So like everybody thinks like, you're going back and talking to family, even they're like, what are you guys building now? I'm like, well, we're designing stuff. And then some things we will build, but mostly we're designing stuff. And they're like, oh, but they continue. So along the lines of civil engineering, then, like, for anybody who doesn't know what the hell a civil engineer does, but you obviously need them at certain points. Yeah. What is your sort of 30-second here? Like, what is a civil engineering? What do you guys do?
Yeah. So even your questions kind of misguided, right? Because there is so many different types of civil engineers, and even our marketing team has trouble parsing out marketing leads from structural engineers, from geotechnical engineers. So we get phone calls for like, design this window well, and I'm like, well, not what we do. So land development, civil engineering, I kind of view that as I always describe that as the talking civil engineer, the one who's capable of leading a project, of communicating with clients, who's outward facing. And so we are tasked with preparing our site design. So think of everything from the building out is what we touch. So sanitary, like utilities, sanitary water coming into the building, detention, water quality is a big one for us. Also, one other thing that really gets looked over in our industry is the entitlement process and understanding how that entitlement
like
process
even that
works.
word. What is that? What does that word?
So that means taking your project from concept, going through the hoops and the rules, following the rules of whatever jurisdiction you're in to get them to sign off on your project. And so that's where you will, so for example, like there are jurisdictions that are insanely difficult, or insane, like Arvada, for example, makes you flatten every PDF. And if you don't flatten every PDF, guess what? They'll reject your
They don't
submission.
even look at it.
Yeah, they don't even look at it. So there's a rule book, and all the rule books are largely the same, but shift between jurisdictions. And so that's really what we do. And I'd say like the biggest flaws I see in the industry, and I know that it kind of pulls off of the question a little bit, but I feel like a bad land development engineer doesn't pay attention to the rule book and doesn't get a project through.
That seems crazy.
Fashion.
That they wouldn't pay attention to the rule book.
Because it's so easy once you've been doing business for several years, and I've fallen trapped to it as well. Even when I started my firm, I was like, I'm going to go back to the original checklist that I haven't looked at in 10 years, right? And so it's so quick to just rely on your experience, and your memory is not as good as you think it is, right? It's like you don't remember that entire checklist from start to finish, and so going back and kind of looking at those things is I'd say makes a good land development engineer. But I'd say on a project, generally speaking, any commercial project, you're going to need a civil engineer. What I mean by commercial project is anything that's not a single family residence. In general, you'll need some type of civil engineering services, whether that be as simple as show where the water line's coming into the building, or we're doing a project together for a fire line on a group home, right? Like that seems like a pretty straightforward civil engineering scope, but that's a pretty straightforward project. That's just a tenant improvement of an existing structure. But we're now, we're preparing a civil engineering drawing for this fire line that's coming into the building. We have some touch on like projects like that, but like the larger ground up infill development has really been where we focus, and that's really where you need a civil engineer. And I would argue, and we make a point of being the point person for the upfront entitlement process, which I just defined for the audience here, being the person that does that, because architects then call you and say, I'm so tired of doing this front end stuff for civil engineers to give me 2 sheets. Can you do it all? Can you coordinate it? And there's a huge value to that too. Yeah.
And I've seen both. I've seen firms take both hats, right? Where it's a civil engineer leading the charge, or architects leading the charge. Mm-hmm. I personally don't know if there's better. I think it all comes down to the owner, what their preference is at a certain point. So on that note about owners and developers, if they're looking for a civil engineering firm, what do you think they should be looking for?
I really think so price is always what they go with, right?
Of course.
So they always hit you with price. And I mean,
even though recently I think you were the middle person. We were like, go with Eric, because trust me.
and that's exactly what I would say is like, you get what you pay for. You get to do bargain bin civil engineering. You can charge a very cheap price, but you get what you pay for. So I would say looking for someone who has that experience through the entitlement process in the jurisdiction you're looking for. I think that in the jurisdiction you're looking for is key. They either understand the playbook or they have gone through the playbook a lot. Because one thing that doesn't get talked about in this is the relationships you have with the jurisdictional staff.
And it matters.
And
they remember your title blocks. Mm-hmm. So it's either a sinking feeling or it's an okay feeling in their stomachs. I guarantee it.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly right. And it's another one of my training in the training like orientation that we do. I always tell whoever I'm training, I say, one thing that we don't do is we don't do repeat comments. We make sure that we respond to the comment.
Yes.
And if you're unsure, you reach out to the reviewer, and that reviewer will appreciate it. Also, we're not rude or unprofessional or standoffish to reviewers, no matter how rude, unprofessional, or standoff they are. Is they will remember you, and they are the lifeblood of getting your project done in that 4-month timeline.
Yep.
Is because I've nurtured relationships through quality work for years that have allowed certain favors to be called in. And so if there is a project where either we miss something or the project, God forbid, missed something and the client's about to lose a ton of money, the deal's about to go hard, whatever, we're able to at least lean on that relationship in the situation to bring, to get the information that would have taken a month in 3 days.
Yeah.
And so that's another critical, I think, aspect of making sure that they have the relationship. And people have heard of, like, when you go to jurisdictions, they've heard of you if you have done work there. They're not doing so many projects that they're, and I think, like, people think they're robots. People think that these comments are robots, right?
I don't know if you've had this happen, but we've had it happen, and I won't name the jurisdiction that does it. It's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing. Is they refer us now. It's insane. I couldn't believe. I'll tell you off air who it is, and I'm sure you'll be happy to hear who it is because they're one of the toughest to get through. But like, so what Eric is saying is correct. Like, they remember you, and we actually get referrals from them now, which is I've never thought that was a thing.
I have gotten referrals, and I'd say Denver's probably specific, and I won't name names because they'd get in trouble. But we have we have gotten referrals, and still do get referrals through Denver, just based off of, if you have an infill project under 5 acres, Raptor's going to.
These are the people.
Eric knows exactly what you need to do. Call him, and he will get you taken care of, and he will get you. And they appreciate it because their life gets easier when they deal with a competent
and that's
consultant.
exactly what I was going to say next. Is if it didn't connect the dots for everybody listening, it's like, that's why, because we've established this relationship, and it makes their job easier.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's a complicated process, though, and going into a new jurisdiction can be scary. And I do always, when we're talking through with clients, saying, say, this is a new jurisdiction for us, or we don't know anybody at the city, is that okay? Being upfront with that, I think, is also key too, because I think there's a lot of BS out there that people will say to land a job, and then it very quickly erodes away, and the client's unhappy.
Yeah, being honest, truthful, and setting the stage for success, and kind of lowering expectations. I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure the higher you set these expectations. Yes. It's just not realistic.
And
right?
I think that there's a younger engineer version of me used to just smile and nod when a client would say 6 months, right? Say, we're going to get through this project in 6 months, right? And then my young ass was just like, yeah, of course, whatever
we can do it.
Yeah, of course, why not? And I'm like, no, back it up. It's a 12-month process from start to finish at a minimum, and then we'll, and then that's going to require you being on it, and that at least sets the table for them. And if you spike the football, get it done in 8 months, or get it done in 6 months, then they're like, wow, okay, that was great. But setting those expectations in a realistic place, because the jurisdictions, I'm sure, as you know, will say, oh, in those concept meetings, how long does the developer ask, how long does it take to get through permit here? Oh, I'd say 4 months or so. I'm like, no, it doesn't.
Do you say anything in the, I mean,
yeah. I am very outspoken because I want to be, I'm the civil engineer just unfortunately takes the brunt of being the bearer of bad news. Is like, we just break bad news to people that you can't do that thing.
You guys do break. You're the first, besides like maybe an architect being the first one to kind of get the package together and do the sticker shock. I would agree with you. Yeah. As far as the process, when you're in the process with the city, it's like, oh yeah, Eric's going to have the worst news ever. We got to have a detention pond. How much does that cost? A lot.
Yeah. And what does it do for me? Nothing. Does it? Or am I? Can I put a grill down there? No, you can't.
Nope.
No, there's not an amenity space. It's a detention pond. But that's, yeah. So it's it's a process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, God bless you for doing it. One last question I like to ask everybody, and you kind of alluded to it about young Eric, right? So if you could go back in time to when you first started your career, and if you could give yourself some advice, knowing what you know now, what would it be?
Pay attention more, ask more questions. I think in that first year and a half run, I wasn't engaged. I just did I was blinders. I did the thing in front of me. And I think if you're a young civil engineer listening to this and you're not asking questions, I think that the principal takes notice of that. I think your managers take notice of that. If you are interested in the work that they are doing, they will put you under their wing and they will bring you in. And I think that's something that early on I didn't do enough of, and I wasn't comfortable doing, but they're just people too. And they're people that want to feel validated in their job and feel good and feel like they have a staff that cares. And I think that that's a way, I guess that would be one thing I would do, is go back and try to cozy up with the higher ups. And I think that would have been
like more procedural firm questions or specific questions to a project, or all of the above.
Humanize them is what I would say.
Okay.
It's like having a human conversation, both about what they do for the job, what their day-to-day looks like, what their responsibilities are, but also like what do you do for fun? What do you do? Because the big boss at a firm is so scary. Like as a young engineer, you don't know. And it's like, and I mean, some of them, I mean, I'm under 40, so like I don't think have quite that level of fear, but I've run engineering departments, and that I was definitely the feared figure in the room.
Yep.
That nobody wanted to have that real, and the engineers that did have that conversation thrived because of it, because I'm not a big, I make a point of always putting down whatever I'm doing, because I like to keep my eye on the most important thing you're doing is still very, very, very
100%.
important to me. Is I'm going to put down the proposal I'm writing. I can get to it tonight. I will keep you moving and on the tracks. And I think a lot of managers miss that, of keeping their staff moving on whatever dumpster fire they're dealing with today.
Yeah, even though they got their own stuff.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I mean, that reminds me of like college, because I would start having these personal conversations with professors,
exactly,
who are the same sort of thing of like, oh, they walk in the room, they're the big scary professor, they command all of this power in terms of grades and all of that, and critiques and stuff.
Yeah.
And Alex, my business partner, at one point, he will back me up on this. He pulled me over and he was like, "Why are you talking to them like that?" I'm like, "Why not? Like, why wouldn't I get to know them in this personal way?" And then we followed through with that all the way through. So I'm with you. That was great advice, Eric. This has been awesome. Where can people follow your firm's work?
Yeah, so you can come to our website, raptor-civil.com. We're also on Facebook, Raptor Civil Engineering. We're also on where else? LinkedIn, Raptor Civil Engineering. Give us a follow. We try to focus content on helping developers become better at the process of developing, and young developers, new developers specifically, are who we kind of target our content at. And so if you are interested in seeing that sort of stuff, we're on a due diligence kick right now, talking about front end things that need to be done that we see developers miss. You can go check that out there. And then also, I think that's really it, actually. I think
You're good to go, yeah.
Do I have another social media platform? I don't think I do.
They're very active on LinkedIn, yeah. So give them a follow there. I don't follow them on Facebook, unfortunately, because I'm mostly on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
At this
well, the
point
Facebook is just the same. Oh, we're on Instagram too.
There you go.
Raptor Civil. And we post kind of the same content across the board. Our marketing team sets us up for that. So it's been, that's where you can find us.
Awesome. Thanks for being on, Eric.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was awesome.
Yeah.